Hello, and welcome to Grayson's Bedtime Story Adventures, where the stars are you, Grayson's beloved friends. Today's story is titled Prince Hyacinth and the Dear Little Princess. Our stars for tonight's adventure are 9-year-old Masina from Bellflower, California, 7-year-old Billie Jean from Bellflower, California, 3-year-old Izie from Bellflower, California, 6-month-old sinivalatai from Bellflower, California, and 6-year-old Ruben from Riverbank, California. As always, I do have my punishment bottle for any time I make a mistake while reading, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy the enchanting tale of Prince Hyacinth and the Dear Little Princess. Once upon a time, there lived a King Ruben, who was deeply in love with Princess Billie Jean. But she could not marry anyone because she was under an enchantment. So King Ruben set out to seek Fairy Masina and ask what he could do to win Princess Billie Jean's love. Fairy Masina said to him,
"You know, that Princess Billie Jean has a great cat, which she is very fond of. Whoever is clever enough to tread on that cat's tail is the man she is going to marry."
King Ruben said to himself that this would not be very difficult, and he left Fairy Masina determined to grind that cat's tail to powder rather than not tread on it at all. For you may imagine that it was not long before he went to see Princess Billie Jean, and Kitty, as usual, marched in before him, arching his back. The king took a long step and quite thought he had the tail under his foot, but the cat turned round so sharply he only trod on air. And so it went on for 8 days, till King Ruben began to think that this fatal tail must be full of quicksilver. It would never still for a moment. At last, however, he was lucky enough to come upon Kitty fast asleep, and with his tail conveniently spread out. So the king, without losing a moment, set his foot upon it heavily. With one terrific yell, the cat sprang up and instantly changed into a tall man, who, fixing his angry eyes upon King Ruben, said,
"You shall marry Princess Billie Jean because you have been able to break the enchantment. But I will have my revenge. You shall have a son who will never be happy until he finds out that his nose is too long. And if you ever tell anyone what I have just said to you, you shall vanish away instantly, and no one shall ever see or hear of you again."
Though King Ruben was horribly afraid of the enchanter, he could not help laughing at this threat. "If my son has such a long nose as that," he said to himself, he must always see it or feel it, at least if he's not blind or without hands." But as the enchanter had vanished, he did not waste any more time in thinking, but went to seek Princess Billie Jean, who had very soon consented to marry him. But after all, they had not been married very long when King Ruben died, and the now Queen Billie Jean had nothing left to care for but her little son, who was called Izie. The little prince had large blue eyes, the prettiest eyes in the world, and a sweet little mouth. But alas, his nose was so enormous that it covered half his face. Queen Billie Jean was inconsolable when she saw this great nose, but her ladies assured her that it was not really as large as it looked, that it was a Roman nose, and you had only to open any history to see that every hero has a large nose. Queen Billie Jean, who was devoted to her baby, was pleased with what they told her, and when she looked at Izie again, his nose certainly did not seem to her quite so large. Prince Izie was brought up with great care, and as soon as he could speak, they told him all sorts of dreadful stories about people who had short noses. No one was allowed to come near him whose nose did not more or less resemble his own, and the courtiers, to get into favor with the queen, took to pulling their babies' noses several times every day to make them grow long. But do what they would, they were nothing by comparison with Prince Izie's. When he grew sensible, he learned history. Whenever any great prince or beautiful princess was spoken of, his teachers took care to tell him that they had long noses. His room was hung with pictures, all of people with very long noses, and Prince Izie grew up so convinced that a long nose was a great beauty that he would not on any account have had his own a single inch shorter. When his 20th birthday was passed, Queen Billie Jean thought it was time that he should be married, so she commanded that the portraits of several princesses should be brought for him to see, and among the others was a picture of the dear little princess sinivalatai. Now, she was the daughter of a great king, and would someday possess several kingdoms herself, but Prince Izie had not thought to spare for anything of that sort. He was so much struck with her beauty. The princess, whom he thought quite charming, had, however, a little saucy nose, which in her face was the prettiest thing possible, but it was a great cause of embarrassment to the courtiers, who had got into such a habit of laughing at little noses that they sometimes found themselves laughing at hers before they had time to think. But this did not do at all before Prince Izie, who quite failed to see the joke, and actually banished 2 of his courtiers who had dared to mention disrespectfully the dear little Princess Sinivalatai's tiny nose. The others, taking warning from this, learned to think twice before they spoke, and one even went so far as to tell Prince Izie that, though it was quite true that no man could be worth anything unless he had a long nose, still a woman's beauty was a different thing, and he knew a learned man who understood Greek and had read in some old manuscripts that the beautiful Cleopatra herself had a tip-tilted nose. Like this. Tip-tilted. Up. Prince Izie made a splendid present as a reward for this good news, and at once sent ambassadors to ask the dear little Princess Sinivalatai in marriage. The king, her father, gave his consent, and Prince Izie, who in his anxiety to see Sinivalatai had gone 3 leagues to meet her, with just advancing to kiss her hand, when to the horror of all who stood by, the enchanter appeared as suddenly as a flash of lightning, and snatching up the dear little Princess Sinivalatai, whirled her away out of their sight. Prince Izie was left quite unconsolable, and declared that nothing should induce him to go back to his kingdom until he had found her again, and refusing to allow any of his courtiers to follow him, he mounted his horse and rode sadly away, letting the animal choose his own path. So it happened that he came presently to a great plain, across which he rode all day long without seeing a single house, and horse and rider were terribly hungry, when, as the night fell, Prince Izie caught a sight of a light which seemed to shine from a cavern. He rode up to it and saw a little old woman who appeared to be at least 100 years old. She put on her spectacles to look at Prince Izie, but it was quite a long time before she could fix them securely because her nose was so short. Prince Izie and Fairy Masina, for that was who she was, had no sooner looked at one another than they went into fits of laughter, and cried at the same moment,
"Oh, what a funny nose!"
Not so funny as your own,
said Prince Izie to Fairy Masina.
But madam, I beg you to leave the consideration of our noses, such as they are, and to be good enough to give me something to eat, for I am starving, and so is my poor horse.
"With all my heart,"
said Fairy Masina.
"Though your nose is so ridiculous, you are, nevertheless, the son of my best friend. I love your father as if he had been my brother. Now, he had a very handsome nose."
And pray what does mine lack?
said Prince Izie.
"Oh, it doesn't lack anything,"
replied Fairy Masina.
"On the contrary, why there is, only too much of it. But never mind. One may be a very worthy man, though his nose is too long. I was telling you that I was your father's in those days. At least he used to say so. I should like to tell you of a conversation we had the last time I ever saw him.
Indeed,
said Prince Izie.
When I have supped, it will give me the greatest pleasure to hear it. But consider, madam, I beg of you, that I have had nothing to eat today.
The poor boy is right,
said Fairy Masina.
I was forgetting. Come in then, and I will give you some supper. And while you're eating, I can tell you my story in a very few words, for I don't like endless tales myself. Too long a tongue is worse than too long a nose. And I remember when I was young that I was so much admired for not being a great chatterer. They used to tell Queen Elizabeth, my mother, that it was so. For though you see what I am now, I was the daughter of a great king, my father.
Your father, I dare say, got something to eat when he was hungry,
interrupted Prince Izie.
Oh, certainly,
answered Fairy Masina.
And you also shall have supper directly. I only just wanted to tell you.
But I really cannot listen to anything until I have had something to eat,
cried Prince Izie, who was getting quite angry. But then, remembering he had better be polite, as he much needed Fairy Masina's help, he added,
I know that in the pleasure of listening to you, I should quite forget my own hunger, but my horse, who cannot hear you, must really be fed.
Fairy Masina was very much flattered by this compliment, and said, calling to her servant,
You shall not wait another minute. You are so polite. And in spite of that enormous-sized nose you have, you are really very agreeable.
Plague take the old lady! How she does go on about my nose,
said the prince to himself.
One would almost think that mine had taken all the extra length that hers lacks. If I were not so hungry, I would soon have done with this chatterpie who thinks she talks very little. How stupid people are to not see their own faults. That comes of being a princess, and she has been spoiled by flatterers, who have made her believe that she is quite a moderate talker.
Meanwhile, the servant was putting the supper on the table, and the prince was much amused to her fairy... Oops. Punishment time! Bottoms up, everybody! Ooh, excuse me. Let's see here. Meanwhile, the servants were putting the supper on the table, and the prince was much amused to hear Fairy Masina, who asked them 1,000 questions simply for the pleasure of hearing herself speak. Especially he noticed one maid, who, no matter what was being said, always contrived to praise her mistress's wisdom.
Well,
he thought, as he ate his supper,
I am very glad I came here. This just shows me how sensible I have been in never listening to flatterers. People of that sort praise us to our faces without shame, and hide our faults or change them into virtues. For my part, I never will be taken in by them. I know my own defects, I hope.
Poor Prince Izie. He really believed that what he said. Oops. Ooh. Excuse me. Poor Prince Izie. He really believed what he said, and had an idea that the people who had praised his nose were laughing at him, just as Fairy Masina's maid was laughing at her. For Prince Izie had seen her laugh slyly when she could do so without Fairy Masina's noticing her. However, he said nothing, and presently, when his hunger began to be appeased, Fairy Masina said,
My dear prince, might I beg you to move a little more that way? For your note casts such a shadow that I really cannot see ago, and I have been in this desolate place ever since. Tell me, what goes on nowadays? And are the ladies as fond of amusement as ever? In my time, one saw them at parties, theaters, balls, and promenades every day. Dear me, what a long nose you have! I cannot get used to it.
Really, madam,
said Prince Izie.
I wish you would leave off mentioning my nose. It cannot matter to you what it is like. I am quite satisfied with it, and have no wish to have it shorter. One must take what one is given.
Oh, now you are angry with me, poor Izie,
said Fairy Masina.
and I assure you that I didn't mean to vex you. On the contrary, I wish to do you a service. However, I really cannot help your nose being a shock to me. I will try not to say anything about it. I will even try to think that you have an ordinary nose. To tell the truth, it would make 3 noses.
Prince Izie, who is no longer hungry, grew so impatient at Fairy Masina's continual remarks about his nose that at last he threw himself upon his horse and rode hastily away. But whenever he came in his journeyings, excuse me. But whenever he came in his journeyings, he thought the people were mad, for they all talked of his nose, and yet he could not bring himself to admit that it was too long. He had been so used all his life to hear it was quite handsome. The old fairy, who wished to make him happy, at last hit upon a plan. She shut the dear little Princess Sinivalatai up in a palace of crystal, and put this palace down where Prince Izie would not fail to find it. His joy at seeing dear little Princess Sinivalatai again was extreme, and he set to work with all his might to break her prison. But in spite of all his efforts, he failed utterly. In despair, he thought at least that he would try to get near enough to speak to the dear little Princess Sinivalatai, who, on her part, stretched out her hand that he might kiss it. But turn which way he might, he never could raise it to his lips, for his long nose always prevented it. For the first time he realized how long it really was, and exclaimed,
"Well, it must be admitted that my nose is too long."
In an instant, the prison flew into 1,000 splinters, and the old fairy, taking the dear little Princess Sinivalatai by the hand, said to the prince,
Now, say if you are not very much obliged to me. Much good it was for me to talk to you about your nose. You would never have found out how extraordinary it was if it hadn't hindered you from doing what you wanted to. You see how self-love keeps us from knowing our own defects of mind and body. Our reason tries in vain to show them to us. We refuse to see them till we find them in the way of our interest.
Prince Izie, whose nose was now just like everyone else's, did not fail to profit by the lesson he had received. He married the dear little Princess Sinivalatai, and they lived happily ever after. Well, all I gotta say about that story is Prince Izie was very polite to the fairy Sinivalatai, the fairy Masina, not pointing out that she chatters too much. He kept himself in her good grace, but the fairy kept bringing up his nose, which, you know, may seem a little rude. But he was the guest, and he acted accordingly. So, I'd like to thank our stars tonight for their contribution to tonight's adventure. Masina, Billie Jean, Izie, Sinivalatai, and Ruben. I hope you all have a great evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed tonight's bedtime story adventure. Did I make any mistakes and didn't drink from the punishment bottle? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you would like to be part of a future bedtime story adventure, leave your name, age, gender, location in the comments below. If you enjoyed our story and would like to see more, subscribe to our channel to get the latest episodes. Meanwhile, check out another one of Greyson's bedtime story adventure video.
Thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you next time.